Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred. And in today's video, I am going to talk to you about a little excerpt from Martha Sweezy's Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt. But instead of going through one of the sample IFS sessions, I want to highlight kind of a text that she has that is about what does shame look like for a person after their parts have been unburdened? And she talks about these two levels of protection that come from the self to part relationship, which Dick Schwartz calls the secure attachment on the inside between the self and the parts. That really is the only antidote to seeking that attachment on the outside that perhaps those parts didn't get when they were young. So what Martha says, this is on page 207, she says, we cannot promise clients that they will never be the object of shaming again, right? It's so interesting. The self will never tell a part, oh, that'll never happen. No one will ever reject you. No one will ever criticize you, abandon you, shame you, because we just don't ever have control over another person. And likely it will happen. Likely other people's protectors will shame us again. So we as a practitioner or the self inside of us will not promise that we will not experience shaming again. But healing exiled parts does not confer immunity, and I guess. Healing exiled parts does not confer immunity from feeling shameful, right? So I often talk about healing all of this past pain that's kind of like stored up in what Eckhart Tolle calls our pain body, right? All of these exiles stuck in the past are holding this pain. And anytime anything bumps against us, right, that pain is felt. So as we bring compassionate witness of the self and witness all of this and heal it, it begins to be released so that we no longer are holding on to all of this past pain and shame. But that doesn't mean that we won't experience present pain and shame. People can still hurt us. We are still human, but it's not hitting against all this reservoir of pain anymore. So we can actually feel and transmute the pain in the present moment now through that self-to-part relationship. So the third thing Martha says, we cannot promise that inner critics will retire for good. That alarm system is likely to persist, though the self can help the shaming parts turn the switch off. So again, there can be shaming on the outside from other people whom we cannot control, and there can also be shaming on the inside from inner critics. And that's kind of their job that they've learned to have. So sometimes they will come up inside of the system. And again, we can turn the self of our client or our own self toward the inner critics, really get to know them, unburden them, so that she calls it turning the switch off, but I would say it's unburdening those critics so that they aren't shaming those young parts anymore. So Martha says, so what are we offering for the long run? We are offering the self to part relationship. And this confers two levels of protection. Number one, the self disproves the message of shaming experiences by holding the part in relationship or holding it literally. This is so true. What counteracts shaming that happens on the outside is the fact that these parts have a resource on the inside in the self that when they do get hurt, can hold them, can be with them, can say, you're not alone, and I reflect your worth, your innate, beautiful worth back to you. And it really is in that secure attachment that we can handle the risk of being shamed by others outside of us. And the second level of protection, number two, is that the self calms the whole protective system. It exists, but it is less active, and it heals the exile, giving everyone inside needed peace. So again, just that deeper healing, that relationship between the self and the protective parts, those inner critics, so they don't have to be so big and harsh and active, and then soothing those exiles, retrieving them, bringing them, updating them, into the present, so they're not as vulnerable. That creates this kind of more solid system. It really is, letting the pressure cooker release of all the past pain. So now we can be present. And if and when there is shame and criticism in the present, the self can turn toward all of those parts pretty readily, because the protective parts allow it, right? So last thing Martha says here is that if an inner critic activates again, we just ask the usual questions. What are you afraid would happen if you stopped doing this? So again, sometimes we can think that we've unburdened a part, like an inner critic, but then certain circumstances on the outside activate parts and the inner critic comes in again. We feel the effect of that inner criticism. And just like with any part, we can turn to it and say, oh, I see that you are still feeling this extreme or this compulsion to have to criticize. Tell me what you're afraid would happen if you didn't do this. And perhaps we've gone back and healed one part that they protected, but they have other parts that they protect that we need to go to. Or perhaps we healed layers of cultural burden, but not the legacy burden, or vice versa, or we haven't healed all the personal burdens that this critic protects. So every time it comes up in a burdened way, in an extreme way, right? It's really harshly criticizing on the inside. It's an opportunity to turn toward it and say, oh, I see you, right? Hopefully now we have a relationship with it. And we can say, I can see that you're feeling really active. Tell me about it. What just happened? What are you afraid of? So Martha says, if and when we get shamed again in the present, this is the outcome. She says, first, I feel hurt. We recognize it in the moment. Someone just shamed or criticized me, or perhaps it happened on the inside, and I feel hurt. That's normal. It's human to feel hurt. And two, I find perspective, humor, and compassion. So we can't stop the offense from coming, the painful thing from coming, but we allow ourselves to feel hurt. And then we have perspective, which is often, this isn't actually about me, it's often about the other person, right? And are there parts of me stuck in the past that I need to help? We have compassion on them. We might even have humor around it. That's actually a very self-led thing to happen. And then finally, we challenge the message, right? Perhaps someone's shaming or criticism is saying, you are so bad. And instead of taking that message on, which is what our exiles had done as a burden, we challenge it. We say, oh, first of all, did I do this thing you're saying I did? And if not, you're seeing it incorrectly. Or if I did, do I think that's bad? If I did it, I know I'm good at my core. So I did something inconsistent with that. How can I make repair? Right? We have just a much more stable base with which to evaluate the shame or the criticism that someone is giving us. And when we have that secure attachment, when we know that we are good on the inside, because the self is reflecting that back to our parts constantly. I see you, I value you, I delight in you, you have innate goodness, you have innate lovability and worth. And we are standing in that. If and when we do something that's inconsistent with that, that may be hurtful to another person or out of alignment with our values, we can say, ah, I see that, I did that. How can I repair it? How can I make it different? And that can only come when we have that secure foundation of our goodness inside. Otherwise, parts will come to try to deflect and defend and shame us. And all that shame cycle, right, makes it really, really difficult for us to actually repair in relationship. So we feel the hurt. We call on the self to give compassion, perspective, humor to the situation. And then we challenge the message. Is it true? If it is, can I make repair? And so that would be, I guess, that would be adaptive guilt, right? If it is something we did and we can make repair, that would not even be shame. But I wanted to share that excerpt with you because I thought it was so powerful. It's not that we will not experience shame and criticism again. It's that we now have a more harmonious, stable system inside, and it's this self-to-part relationship that allows us to handle it in a way that's productive and not distressing and destructive. So tell me what you think about that. Do you have any questions about it? Does it make sense to you? Does it make sense in your experience? Let me know in the comments.